through the panoramic windows of the sleek Seattle restaurant. The city lights of downtown glittered against the dark canvas of the evening. Inside, it was warm, intimate. Daniel sipped his bourbon on the rocks, savoring a rare weeknight when he could finally unplug from the endless project deadlines and just be with his wife. Laura was sitting across from him, chin resting in her palm, studying him with an intensity that made the corners of her mouth twitch into a faint smile. Her eyes sparkled in the dim, ambient light. "You know, I was just thinking," she said, casually swirling the Pinot Noir in her glass. "About what?" Daniel looked up from his drink. She leaned forward slightly, a playful glint in her voice. "Women like it when their men get a little jealous." He let out a short, breathy laugh. "Oh, really?" "Totally," she said, taking a small sip of wine. She licked the drop from her bottom lip, as if savoring the thought. "We like to feel wanted, like you afraid to lose us." Daniel grunted, shaking his head. "Well, babe, I'm definitely not afraid of losing you." She narrowed her eyes. "And that's your biggest mistake." Something in her tone put him on edge. It was not the words themselves, but how she said them. Too confident, too smooth, as if she already knew exactly where this conversation was headed. "You want me to be jealous of you?" he asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of his voice. "Not exactly." She spun the glass, watching the wine cling to the sides. "I am just curious. If I were to flirt with someone, would you actually show some emotion? Or would you just shrug and swallow it down?" Daniel's brow furrowed. "Are you planning on flirting with someone?" "Of course not." She smiled, leaning back in her chair and crossing her legs. "But, there's this guy at work, Nick. He is pretty charming, I have to admit." She said it casually, but there was a weight behind the words. "And we have a company dinner this Friday, at the Nest. I was thinking, maybe we could try a little experiment?" He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of experiment?" "Let's say I am having a nice chat with Nick. You see it and you get, a little possessive. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough to show everyone I am yours." Daniel put his glass down, the ice clinking softly as he processed her proposal. "And what's in it for you?" "It's a game." Her smile widened. "A small, harmless game. Are not you the least bit curious to see how you handle a situation like that?" She was staring at him now, daring him. He paused. Deep down, he was not a jealous guy. The thought of his wife flirting with some marketing exec did not sit well with him, but she could not be serious, right? It was just a game. He felt the conversation pulling him somewhere strange, but he could not find a solid reason to say no. "So what exactly are you expecting from me?" Laura leaned in closer, her fingers brushing lightly against the back of his hand. "Just play the part. Pretend you scared to lose me. A little spark never hurt a relationship." Daniel looked at her, and for a moment, something felt off. He felt like he was missing a piece of the puzzle, that this conversation was more than just a joke. But just as quickly, Laura changed the subject, laughing about a new campaign at her agency, gossiping about her coworkers, filling the space with meaningless chatter. Later that night, as they lay in bed in their queen and condo, he found his mind drifting back to it. Why did she need this? Why was she pushing so hard for him to play the jealous husband? An unsettling feeling crept up his spine. Friday night arrived. The rooftop bar was packed, a chaotic symphony of clinking glasses and loud conversations. Waitstaff weaved through the crowd with trays of cocktails and appetizers, the air thick with the scent of truffle fries, expensive gin, and designer perfume. In the center of the terrace, gathered around a series of long tables, was Laura's team. A dozen employees from the ad agency, already a few drinks in and primed for a good time. Daniel walked in and scanned the crowd. Laura was near the middle, and next to her sat a tall, dark-haired man in a designer shirt, the top button casually undone. He was leaning in, saying something that made her laugh and toss her head back. A lock of hair fell across her shoulder, and she playfully tucked it back. "Nick." Daniel felt a prick of annoyance but quickly reminded himself. It's a game. Her idea. He was not here because he was actually jealous. He was here to see where this was all going. Taking a deep breath, he made his way toward them. "Well, look who it is. Our guest of honor." Laura beamed as he approached. She stretched slightly, a deliberate move that exposed the elegant line of her neck, before gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Good to meet you," Nick said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, confident. His smile practiced. Daniel nodded, shaking it. "You too." He sat down, his eyes sweeping across the table. Wine glasses were full. Someone was telling a loud story about a client pitch gone wrong, and laughter erupted from the far end. The vibe was loose, celebratory. But Daniel felt a knot of tension in his gut. Laura was not looking at him directly, but he could feel her peripheral gaze tracking his every move. She was testing him. He had a role to play. He slowly reached out and placed his hand over hers on the table. "Having fun?" She smiled, not pulling her hand away. "Of course. How about you, Nick?" he asked, turning to his wife's colleague, still feigning the part. Nick smirked, giving a slight shrug. "Hey, it is a great crowd. Say not complain, right?" There was a hint of a challenge in his voice, as if he was alluding to something Daniel was not supposed to know yet. Daniel sat up straighter, his gaze flickering between the two of them. He draped an arm over the back of Laura's chair, his knuckles intentionally brushing Nick's shoulder. She let out a light, airy laugh, as if she'd been expecting it. "Are you actually getting jealous?" Nick chuckled and took a sip of his wine. "Easy there, man. We just talking." A few of their co-workers exchanged glances. Someone snickered. Daniel forced a smile and leaned back. "Of course." But inside, something tightened. It was all too easy, too rehearsed. This dinner was not a test of his feelings. It was a performance, and he had no idea who the audience was. Laura's fingers slid across his arm, giving it a gentle squeeze as if to tell him to relax. "Let's just enjoy the night, okay?" She turned her gaze back to Nick, and in that fleeting moment, Daniel caught it. An almost imperceptible spark that passed between them. A quick glance, a barely there smile, but it was enough. He was missing something. The city lights of Seattle glowed beyond their bedroom window. Headlights from the occasional car cut through the quiet streets below, their motors a distant hum. Daniel lay in bed, listening to the sound of the shower running in the master bath. He could faintly hear Laura humming to herself, completely at ease. She was relaxed, pleased that her little game had been a success. Daniel rolled onto his side, his eyes landing on her iPhone on the nightstand. The screen was dark, but a second later, it lit up with a new notification. He had no intention of looking. He was not that guy, but the message was from Nick. "You were incredible tonight." When's the encore? The water was still running. The humming did not stop. Slowly, Daniel sat up. He felt something rising inside him. A cold, controlled fury. It did not tear at him or make him lose control. No, this was a different feeling. A sharp, chilling awareness that he had been used. He picked up the phone, swiped, and it unlocked. The message thread scrolled back for weeks. No, months. Flirting, innuendos, pet names that had once belonged only to him. "Nick, you have no idea how hot it was. Watching you look at me while your husband was trying to play tough. Laura, I just love having you close. And the whole jealousy scene. Admit it, it just turned up the heat. Nick, next time we can be even bolder." Daniel's fingers tightened around the phone. But the next one was worse. A message from Laura, the day before the first dinner. "Laura, I want him to get jealous. LL just make it hotter for us." He froze. It was a punch to the gut. They had used him. His jealousy was not a test. It was spice for their affair. Daniel closed his eyes, breathing slowly through his nose. The cold rage settled inside him, but now it had a structure, purpose. The shower turned off. He placed the phone back on the nightstand, screen down. He lay back down, closed his eyes, and listened as Laura dried off. The soft rustle of the towel, the click of the bathroom door opening. You still awake?" Her voice was soft, almost caring. Daniel slowly turned his head to look at her, but said nothing. He just rolled over, facing the window, and began to think about what he was going to do to them. The next morning, Daniel got ready for work just like any other day. He knotted his tie, drank his coffee, and gave her a kiss on the temple. She smiled. "Have a good day, honey." "You too," he replied, a playful edge to his voice. An hour later, he was sitting in the downtown office of a private investigator. "So, you re-looking for surveillance?" The man across the desk studied him with a practiced, impassive gaze. There were no unnecessary questions. Only experience. "Yes," Daniel said calmly. 2 weeks of standard observation will give you the full picture. Photos, video, calls, meetings. Daniel nodded. "Start today." 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of surveillance, of dozens of photos, video clips, and irrefutable proof. 2 weeks during which Laura suspected nothing. She went about her life, believing her husband had bought the act, that their little game was a thing of the past. She had no idea the end was already so close. Daniel watched his wife across the dinner table, listening to her talk excitedly about an upcoming party, and he recognized the familiar glint in her eye. "Hey, maybe this Friday we can test that jealousy of yours again?" Laura threw out with a smirk, as if it were their new inside joke. She sat opposite him, twisting a strand of hair around her finger and tilting her head, a move she always made when she was feeling particularly pleased with herself, as if she'd just said something incredibly clever. Daniel offered a gentle smile. "Of course, babe." She came around the table, running her fingers playfully over his shoulder. "I hope you try a little harder this time. You were not very convincing last time." He chuckled, looking up at her. "I promise. This time there will be a show." She laughed, oblivious to just how right he was. Now he was smiling, so easily that even she, with all her intuition, noticed nothing. She just laughed in response, waved a hand, and reached for her glass of wine. But inside, everything was cold. On Friday night, they returned to the same restaurant, a place that was becoming far too familiar. A live jazz trio in the corner was trying its best to be heard over the hum of conversation. People at neighboring tables lazily raised their glasses, discussing deals and weekend plans. A loud burst of laughter came from the bar, where a mixologist was putting on a show for a group of tourists. Daniel took his usual seat. He watched as Laura once again positioned herself a little closer to Nick. It was not obvious, not so blatant that anyone would notice. It was an art form. The angle of her body, the subtle lean in his direction, the rare but calculated brush of her hand against his as she pretended to reach for a napkin. Nick was the picture of relaxation. He was telling jokes, his hand wrapped confidently around his glass, his laugh just a little too loud. There was not a trace of concern on his face, not a shadow of a doubt. He was in complete control of the situation. Daniel sat slightly apart, observing in silence. He watched them as if they were on a stage, a play in which his role had been scripted, but he'd already thrown the script away and was just waiting for his cue to walk on and deliver his real lines. Nick leaned in closer, whispering something in Laura's ear. She tilted her head toward him, a small smile playing on her lips as she glanced away. The whole game was too polished, too rehearsed to be an accident. Daniel picked up his glass of bourbon. The cold, heavy tumbler felt good in his hand. He slowly raised it to his lips, took a sip, then another. He set the glass down on the coaster and looked directly at Laura. She was laughing again. Her eyes were sparkling, partly from the wine, but also from some private joy she'd been hiding so well. Nick made a joke, adjusted his tie, and threw his head back with a loud, obnoxious laugh. Laura placed her hand on his forearm. A light, almost innocent touch, but she did not pull it away. Daniel knew the moment had come. He slowly rose from his chair. His movements were not sudden. He moved as if nothing unusual was happening. He walked around the table, taking a few deliberate steps toward them. Nick and Laura were still laughing. They did not even notice he stood up. It was only when Daniel's shadow fell across their table that Laura looked up, her smile freezing for a split second as she tried to process what was happening. Daniel stared directly at Nick. Silently, without blinking, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his face. The music was still playing, but he could not hear it anymore. The restaurant around them seemed to melt away. There were only the three of them. Nick opened his mouth to say something, but Daniel did not give him the chance. He slowly placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing just enough to get his attention. "Having a good time?" he asked, his voice so low only they could hear him. Laura flinched but did not move. Nick forced an awkward smile. Yeah, of course." Daniel leaned in closer. "Good. Now let's talk business." In one explosive motion, Daniel's hand shot from Nick's shoulder to his collar, yanking him out of his seat. The wine glass he'd been holding flew from his hand, shattering on the floor as red wine splashed across the white tablecloth like a spray of blood. Nick tried to shout, but before he could make a sound, Daniel slammed him to the ground. His body hit the polished marble floor with a sickening thud, followed by the crack of the chair he'd knocked over and the clatter of a fork. Then silence. A heavy, absolute silence. Every conversation in the restaurant stopped. Heads turned. Waiters froze mid-stride, trays balanced precariously. Only the pianist, lost in his melody, played on for a few more bars before faltering. Daniel took a slow step forward and, without a word, planted the sole of his shoe on the side of Nick's head, pressing his face into the cold marble. Nick groaned, trying to push himself up, but Daniel's weight kept him pinned. Daniel leaned down, his voice a venomous whisper that seemed to carry across the entire room. "You wanted to use me to turn up the heat? How's this for heat?" Laura shot up from her chair, her eyes wide with terror. "Daniel, are you out of your mind? Let him go." She reached a hand out as if to stop him but did not dare get any closer. Her voice was a strangled hiss. Daniel did not even look at her. His other hand was already reaching inside his suit jacket, pulling out a thick manila envelope. A standard office envelope, but right now it felt as heavy as a brick. He tore it open and pulled out a stack of photographs. Glossy, full color, and damningly clear. He tossed them onto the table, spreading them out for everyone to see. One photo showed Laura and Nick walking out of the Four Seasons, hand in hand, smiling like they'd just won the lottery. Another was a shot through a car window, her lips pressed against his neck as he drove his Tesla. A third showed them in a tight embrace outside the entrance to a luxury apartment building in Belltown. Laura froze. Her gaze darted between the photos on the table and Daniel's stony face. She could not speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I can explain." The words finally escaped, a hoarse whisper that sounded like a lie even to her own ears. A ripple of murmurs spread through the nearby tables. Diners leaned in, craning their necks to get a better look at the photos. Someone raised their iPhone, the red recording light blinking in the dimness. The waiters huddled by the service station, whispering. Even the pianist had stopped playing, the sudden, heavy silence finally breaking through his concentration. Daniel turned his head slowly toward Laura. His expression was calm, almost cold, but the corners of his mouth were twisted into a cruel, barely there smirk. "Really?" His voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the restaurant, it carried like a gunshot. "Then explain it to all of them." He lifted his foot off Nick's head. The man groaned and rolled onto his side, trying to push himself up, but he only managed to clutch his head, as if trying to physically hold in the pain and humiliation. Laura took a shaky step back, her legs trembling. She tried to form words, but every glance at the photos, every whisper from the crowd, every judgmental stare from her coworkers choked them in her throat. The restaurant was now suspended in a ringing silence. Guests had put down their forks. Waitstaff stood motionless. The person with the phone was still recording. The silence was suffocating, spreading through the room like a physical weight, as if everyone simultaneously realized they were witnessing the kind of raw, private implosion that would be talked about for weeks. Nick was breathing heavily on the floor, his face pale. His chest heaved. One hand braced uselessly against the marble, trying to find the strength to stand. Laura stood paralyzed. Her eyes flickered from her husband to the photos and back again. Her fingers trembled, but she made no move to gather the pictures or hide them. It was as if every circuit inside her had shorted out. Daniel slowly straightened up. He looked down at Nick, then at his wife. There was no rage in his eyes. Hurt? Maybe, but not anger. Just the cold, clear understanding that their story was over. He held up his left hand and slowly, deliberately, twisted off his wedding ring. It slid off his finger easily, as if it knew it no longer belonged there. He opened his palm, and the platinum band fell with a soft, metallic clink, landing directly on the photo of Laura and Nick leaving the hotel, holding hands. "You wanted to test my jealousy?" His voice was steady, but in the silence, each word hit like a hammer blow. "Congratulations. Now you get to test what it's like to be alone." Laura's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Nick groaned in pain as he tried and failed to get up again. Daniel did not look at them anymore. He shoved his hands in his pockets, turned, and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor. As he passed the tables, he could feel their eyes on him. He saw pity, shock, and in a few faces, a flicker of admiration for a man who refused to be played. He did not look back. The host by the door started to say something, but he met Daniel's gaze and thought better of it. The cold Seattle air hit him as he stepped outside. The city was alive, indifferent. Cars streamed down the street. Sirens wailed in the distance. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks. To them, the drama that had just unfolded inside was nothing. Daniel took a deep, cleansing breath. He gripped the keys to his Ford Bronco in his hand, allowing himself to close his eyes for just a second. And then he walked on without a backward glance. Behind him, a crowd was starting to form around the humiliated Laura and the broken Nick. _ 3 months later, Laura sat at a large mahogany table in a high-rise lawyer's office. Her fingers knotted together. Her nails, once impeccably manicured, were bitten down to the quick. She stared at a spot on the polished wood, avoiding eye contact with the man across from her. "He's not leaving me anything?" Her voice was a faint whisper. Her lawyer, a man in his late 50s with expensive glasses, sighed heavily. "Absolutely nothing, Ms. Marshall." She clenched her jaw. "But I am his wife. I am entitled to half of the assets. For Christ's sake." "Ex-wife," he corrected gently, turning a page in a thick file. "And according to the prenuptial agreement you signed, the infidelity clause is quite clear." He did not need to finish. Laura slumped back in the leather chair, burying her face in her hands. Her world had completely imploded. Her beautiful life, the luxury condo, the new Audi, the casual shopping trips to Nordstrom, it was all gone. Daniel had taken everything, leaving her with only her personal belongings and the old Toyota she de-owned before they were married. "He did not even let me keep the condo," she whispered. The lawyer shrugged. It was his property pre-marriage. He presented more than enough evidence of the affair in the divorce proceedings, and after the video from the restaurant, he trailed off. Laura stiffened. "What? After the video from the restaurant?" The lawyer adjusted his tie, suddenly finding the view of Puget Sound outside his window fascinating. "You might not be aware, but the video went viral." A cold dread washed over her. "What are you talking about?" "The video of the incident. Someone posted it to TikTok. It blew up. It has millions of views. People love this stuff." The headlines were brutal. "Husband exposes cheating wife in epic restaurant takedown." The comments, "Let's just say public opinion is not on your side." Laura shot to her feet. No. She fumbled for her phone, frantically opening her web browser. And the first thing that popped up was her own public shaming. Hundreds of thousands of comments. Dozens of memes. It all clicked into place. The strange looks from people on the street, the whispers she heard in line at the grocery store. She could not even go into a coffee shop without seeing someone recognize her and start whispering to their friend. She lost her job. The agency had fired her for conduct unbecoming, citing the damage to their reputation. Her professional life was destroyed. Her social life was a wasteland. She had lost everything. Daniel sat on the terrace of his condo, watching the evening breeze stir the leaves of the trees below. He held a glass of bourbon. He knew, somewhere in the city, Laura was having a meltdown. He did not care anymore. The game was over, and that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.